Welcome to the Clause YouTube channel.
Together, we strive for a safer, secure, and more stable world.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Clause YouTube channel Strategic Frontlines. Today we have with us Air Marshal Dr. Diptendu Choudhury, PVSM, AVSM, VSM retired. He is a strategic expert and the author of the book Indian Air Power, Contemporary and Future Dynamics. I welcome you to this podcast, Air Marshal Choudhury. And
Thank you, Dr. Roshan. It's a pleasure to be with Clause. I think this is the first ever.
Yes, no, it's a pleasure to have you with us, and especially since we are discussing Pakistan air power. So we couldn't have thought of anybody better than you. So we'll start the discussion with, I'll just like to focus that recently Pakistan's Air Force Chief Zahir Ahmed had gone to the US. Now, he had gone there after a very long time. I mean, for a few years, nobody had gone there. And they said that two things had happened, that they had tried to reset the military relations, and also defense cooperation was one of the areas what they had mentioned, whether it was interoperability between the two forces, the training program, and also they were looking for F-16 fighter jets, AIM-7 air-to-air missiles, and also since Chinese air defense system was not very good, so they were looking into that also. But for that, we'll come later on. So my first two questions are, considering that Pakistan have nearly 80% dependence on the Chinese defense industry, so, and they are also using the Baidu system. So why they want to use American training program and other things? Won't it be more complex and it will create more complexity in the thing? And secondly, will US be very keen to supply, because considering China-Pakistan collusivity, we know that in the past the Tomahawk cruise missile had been reverse engineered by the Chinese. So we would like to know your initial remarks, and what do you think? Is it a hype or there's some reality to it? Your views.
So, I think, when we talk about Pakistan and especially Pakistani Air Force, I think you cannot dissociate Pakistani Air Force away from the United States Air Force, or the United States for that matter. Because, in fact, right from post-independence days, when we separated as two separate nations after the partition, the Pakistani Air Force was to a great extent and enormously, almost for a decade, in the late 50s and early 60s, it was supplied military equipment by the United States. And that was because Pakistan was a part of, if you remember, what was called the SEATO, Southeast Asian Treaty Organization, and part of the CENTO. In fact, India was not a part of it. And this treaty organizations, essentially both these treaty organizations, they were looking at stemming the tide of communism in the world. And Pakistan joined the bandwagon. So they got an enormous amount of assistance in the early 60s. And actually, in terms of technology, they were ahead of the Indian Air Force in terms of they had the latest platforms of they had acquired the Starfighter, they had acquired the F-86 Sabres, and they were armed with air-to-air missiles. And India at that time, and in fact, when it went into the 1965 war, we didn't have any air-to-air missiles. We had fighters only with guns. So there is a huge history of long links with the United States. And a quick thing I want to bring out here is that for the United States, Pakistan remains a strategic player in its larger game plan, because that's the only nation which has a significant control and foothold, if I may say, in South Asia or Southeast Asia for that matter. So it's an important aspect. And only thing is, what happened was, I think during this the spell of over the years, there was a waxing and waning of US interests given Pakistan's association with terror, and especially after 9/11, in fact. And so Pakistan has been a party to the global war, US global war on terror, which ended them continuing to get US aid. They got the latest F-16s, advanced missiles, and as well. And it had enormous assistance from the United States. So while it, I think around 80s, it really balanced itself and shifted towards China because it's in own homegrown industry dependent on China. So the larger point I'm trying to make is the Pakistan has always been an important player and remains so in the US game of and scheme of things. And Pakistan's connection with China, and especially in the aviation industry, is more to expand its aviation base because the supplies from the US, what it gets, is very restricted and limited, and it's been able to develop its homegrown aviation industry thanks to the Chinese.
Yes, you very rightly pointed out now getting the Chinese angle into it. As far as Pakistan is concerned, their combat aircraft is concerned, we know that they have the JF-70s, J-10, and some of the F-16. But there were rumors that they might be getting the J-35s, the fifth generation stealth aircraft. How effective are these aircraft? And also, considering that they are also in talks with the Turks as
Yes.
far as their fifth generation Khan fighter jets are concerned. So I think they are all concentrating on this platform. So they want to co-produce other aerial assets also with them, like joint attack helicopters, drones, as also a defense system. So I want to ask you, how authentic is this collaboration between the Turks and the Pakistanis, and what repercussions will it be?
So whatever information is available, and these days the challenge is it's very difficult to rely on information. You never know
Yes.
whether how much of it is true and how much of it is, sort of added on narratives. But there is no denying the fact that the Pakistanis have been negotiating with the Chinese and the PLA for a long time for the J-35 fifth generation fighter. And in fact, very interestingly, it has also got engaged with Turkey, like you very rightly, Turkish aviation industry, and their fifth generation fighter called the Khan, which Pakistan hopes to sort of redesignate and possibly in future get into sort of a joint development with Turkey, and is going to be called Iqbal, if I'm not wrong. So
Yes.
if you look at it, Pakistan has been very prescient, forward thinking in its strategic outlook, because it knows that there are limits to its future development with the US in terms of advanced capabilities, and the US is very restrictive in who they supply their equipment to. So they will most certainly keep the supplies up on the F-16 and its associated wherewithal, but there are limits to that. So Pakistan has invested a lot of interest and has shown keen initiative to join with this J-35. And what I'm given to understand, because the two subsequent Pakistani air chiefs, including the present one, had been visiting China fairly regularly to negotiate this. And the extent of support they have engaged even during the recent exercise, and which is evident, with Chinese platforms, there is no denying that China will continue to be a serious player and supplier of the J-35. And obviously, now if you look at it in any manner, the Khan is in competition with the J-35. So I'm sure the
Yes.
Chinese will sweeten the deal as well for them. And so I think they are, and Pakistan does this very well. They are playing off both sides, and I'm sure they will pull off something to their advantage. But this is, we must bear in mind that the Pakistan is also aviation industry is also looking at developing its own stealth fighter called the PFX. So I don't know how far that is there. It's possibly only on the drawing board. There is very little information available about, but there is no denying the fact that the transition the Pakistani Air Force is going to make is away from its legacy equipment of the old Mirages and the older platforms that it has to modern 4.5 to 5th generation fighters, definitely. So, the J-10s and JF-17s come between 4.5 generation. But the J-35 and the Khan are certainly in the 5th generation category. So I think it's a reality which Pakistan will try and work very hard. How the geopolitics pans out, how things finally end up, that is something it remains to be seen.
I think they already have the base as far as aircraft production is concerned, because the JF-17 they have been producing with the help of the
Absolutely.
Chinese. So,
Absolutely.
yeah. But my thing is, where will they get all the finances to do that? If we see the economy part, they're not doing very well. So, where the finance is going to come?
Dr. Roshan, this is a very interesting question. But if you look back, when was Pakistan ever in the, what should I say, not in the red? And yet it has continued exporting equipment, continued leveraging other countries to its advantage. And I think at a level, they had sort of mastered the art of, going around literally, I mean, without disrespect to anybody, with a begging bowl really for, getting funds from across. And it's been a traditional history that the whatever bailouts they gets a majority of it gets reinvested in their defense equipment and sort of upkeep of the wherewithal of the privileged creamy layer. The nation has been suffering all along. So I don't think that's going to make any difference. Whatever money they can manage from anywhere, they will always leverage it to their more military requirements than national requirements of their citizens on the street.
Between Khan and that J35, which is considered to be better in terms of operationability and stealth features and other things?
So, it's a difficult question because both these nations, and in fact, the Turkish aviation industry is nascent, but it's progressed very fast. We have seen the employment of the drones in Ukraine, and the famous T2 Bayraktar, and which was actually incidentally produced by the Erdogan son. I think he owns the company. But I think there is a lot of marketing also going on at this point in time. The Khan is an unproven and untested platform. So typically, whereas the F-35, it's a Chinese, it's a part of their inventory, and in the sense that they have developed this platform specifically and opened it up for exports. So, given the choice between the Turkish platforms and the Chinese platform, at this point, I don't think I would uh, put them in any sort of benchmark with any other proven Western fighters at this point in time, because they have not yet been tested or proven operationally,
Absolutely.
nor have we seen them in exercises and things like that. So it'll take some time, but I'm sure.
Yes.
I mean, it's not that they can be, 100% of what they claim to be, but even if there's 70% of what they claim to be, it's a start. It's a beginning, and more sales will lead to more improvement in the platform.
Yes.
So
Since
I
you
won't. Sorry, please go ahead.
no, please go ahead.
No, so I only said that given the credibility of the Chinese industry, and this is what I think has been on the minds of a large quantum of the Western nations, is how good are the Chinese equipment, and that worries us as well for a lot. So we got a precursor or a short view of that in the recent exercise Operation Sindoor. But what actually worries me is the fact that their ability to correct these mistakes at a very high speed and rate, and they've certainly learned a lot of lessons. So
Yes.
in future, I think they will develop to be a fairly decent, I think, fifth generation platforms.
I think what you said is what you rightly pointed out is Chinese are also testing. They all their equipments are they're trying to test it how further they can improve, and Operational Sindoor was a test ground for them. So you were talking about one particular aspect we can take. You were talking about the drones. So as far as drones is concerned, we know it has transformed the what you call a warfare, and we had seen in Operation Sindoor also Pakistan was using drones made by the Chinese, that is Wing Long 2 and the Turkish Bayraktar, but they were not very effective and they were not very good. And so this is an area how Pakistan is developing and what are they doing in this area. And because in Operation Sindoor those combat drones were not very effective. Your views?
So first, let's talk about a little bit about drones in general. Drones are what should I say, new kid on the block, which, like the new generation, rapidly shot to fame in the Russo-Ukraine war. And but the point I would like to make here is that the technological development in the drone industry, their employment, extensive employment in Ukraine, and Ukraine, in fact, Ukraine probably is the nation which has triggered this race for drones, simply because it had to compensate for the absence of a credible air power. And whatever little air power it had rapidly diminished and disappeared after the initial days. And it reached a stage because of the Russian domination of Ukrainian airspace, they couldn't employ their fighters anymore. And they lost a lot of fighters. And at the end of the day, even with the new F-16s, which they got after a long time, and it took them a long time to train on them, they lost a fair amount of them as well. So unmanned platforms became the weapon of choice for Ukraine out of sheer necessity. And Ukraine has been a country of military, fair amount of military development and capacity and enormous innovation. And the kind of innovation which has been shown in the Ukrainian drone industry has been enormous. But you will realize one thing, that when it started off, it created some, it was shocked everybody, it surprised everybody with the capabilities. But very rapidly, the drone losses also started increasing. So the point I'm trying to make is drone is a field where the counters to drone or UAS technology is working as quickly as the technological development. So this is going to be a continuous game of, something new. It's counter, then counter. So this is how it's going to progress. So this is the aspect, but the fact is it gave a very cheap option and expanded the employment of air power. Now people make the mistake of jumping to a conclusion, oh, drones, you don't need man fighters anymore. And that's extreme outlooks, pole positions, which I think are grossly overstated and incorrect. But what is important is that drones, and including missiles and rockets, have in effect expanded the scope of aerial warfare because they all use the aerial medium. So air power in a larger context also includes drones, rockets, and missiles, and which have now become, and they have come to stay in all current and future war fighting. Pakistan was very quick to observe this, and in fact absorbed drone technology itself on its own. And we saw that shaping out and panning out. But the quality, it really doesn't produce high quality drones. A lot of them were off the shelf purchases which they picked up. The Turkish drones which came, you have to understand that not every platform will operate in the same manner in a different context of employment or in a different operational environment. And I think that is what has emerged for Pakistan, the kind of efforts it had made to establish a drone capability, and it used it. But to my mind, I would put it very simply that it fell well short of possibly their stated goals and ends. In effect, that we managed to shoot most of them down, and they couldn't create the damage which we did.
Yes.
So the point here I'm also trying to make, that if you want high quality drones, expensive drones, they come at a cost. So you have to trade off. Where do you lie the balance? And it's all comes to the cost dynamics that should I go for low end drones or high end drones? Because high end drones have a problem. If they are vulnerable as well, and you lose a high end drone, it hurts way much more than what you would lose the small drones. So I think it's going to be a balance for the future. And Pakistan is not going to ease up on this drone thing. They're going to continue pursuing it and possibly look at homegrown development as well in the future.
Related to this, there was another area which we were talking about was the air defense system, and we know that the Chinese HQ-9s were not that effective, and there were rumors that they were trying to have the US. They are trying to lobby for the Patriot system. Do you feel it is a rumor, or how it is going to pan out?
Okay, first is on the air defense system, and Pakistan has been, I think it's very, from a very long time, Pakistan took its air defense very seriously, because at the end of the day, Indian Air Force had enormous offensive capability, way more than Pakistan through history. And they realized that they need a very robust and a resilient air defense system, and they invest in it for a very long time. In fact, it was called the ADGIS, the Air Defense Ground Environmental System, which the older ones they had what they called was the SILAX. This was in the late 70s and 80s, the SILAX system. It was a Siemens company set up for basically low-level air defense system. But ever since air warfare moved up, earlier it was low-level intensive. Then Kosovo pushed air warfare into the medium altitudes because of proliferation of shoulder-fired and SAM systems. So what earlier air power used to do was use exclusively low level, now got moved to the higher altitude system. So Pakistan also integrated advanced radars and networked them and a whole array to get a sort of a multi-tier system in its place. And they used a fair amount of Chinese weapons and integrated them along with the old legacy systems which they already had. In fact, the oldest system which they had is the French Crotal, which was the most potent system they had long back. But they also face probably a similar challenge like India, in that they had to get mix and match their air defense systems and plug them together. So typically you will find that from a larger air defense perspective, though they have early warning aircraft and AVAX as well, the AEW aircraft, which is a part of the air defense system, is a Swedish platform, the IRI, and that is networked well with the F-16s and the AMRAAMs and the Turkish drones. Whereas the Chinese system is plugged in with the Chinese AVAX, which they have, along with the Chinese missiles, and they network it with all their contemporary Chinese fighters, the J-10s, the JF-17s. So they all networked and formed a part of one air defense system. So when it came this time, obviously there are limits to the systems which they have incorporated from abroad, and that came through. That showed up in the shortcomings and the weaknesses and the vulnerabilities of the Chinese air defense, Chinese assisted Pakistan air defense system. I think was possibly, I will say, I will put it this way, that it failed compared to the robustness of the Indian system. But the Indians looked at it very differently. We in the IAF had looked at our air defense in a very different manner. Conceptually, in fact, this is something I'd written about almost a decade ago when we first got to know that we're going to get the S-400 system, because the S-400 has an enormous range capability and altitude capability.
Absolutely.
So that's when we said air defense from an Indian perspective. We actually doctrinally also we accepted the fact that the air defense word is limited in its construct. It's actually become offensive, because these systems, the advanced radars which we have today, in which look at extensive depth inside adversarial territory at higher altitudes, right down to very low levels as well. So it's an entire bubble which is transposed over adversarial spaces, which we have enormous visibility over the hostile airspaces. Now you bring in a SAM system which can target adversarial platforms well inside adversarial spaces. So it makes air defense a very offensive a system, a platform. In fact, I mean, I won't say system. There's all these systems make it a very potent. What I have, I mean, I coined this terms long back, and I've been sort of using it extensively. It's called extended integrated air defense system. Everybody knew about integrated air defense system, but I said India actually has an extended integrated air defense system, which paid enormous dividends in the way we integrated it. So we were able to actually dominate adversarial or Pakistan's airspace, and their fighters, after the first set of operation, they were forced back to move into depths. And despite that, they are not yet confirmed by the Indian Air Force, but there are very clear indications that we have shot down fighters as deep inside their adversarial airspace, and possibly shot down a high value asset, maybe an AVAX, well inside the territory in excess of 200 plus kilometers at the
Yes.
extreme ranges. So
Yes.
that I think is enormous, and it is a
Amazing.
testimony of robustness of our system and vulnerability of theirs.
Absolutely, absolutely. So here I just want to get in the contours of China's PAF and China's PLAF and Pakistan's PAF collusion in terms of training, tactics, or any other area where you feel that they both are doing things together.
So you have hit a nail on the head, which has been my area of focus for the last 5 years, and I've been writing about it, screaming from the rooftops, literally in all my talks wherever I go, is about this PAF and PLAF collusion. And this is something we have to take it back to a fact that right from the time I think 2011 is the time. Now this is all post Kargil. Post Kargil, the PF realized that the Indian Air Force was a different kettle of fish, and we had a BVR advantage over them, and that is one of the reasons why they didn't dare to come across or use their air power effectively in Kargil. But in 2011 onwards, that means immediately post Kargil, both China and the PF took enormous steps to improve their air forces in their capabilities. The PLF especially watched the Desert Storm very, very closely. And in fact, in the book by those two Chinese PLF colonels, Unrestricted Warfare, they say that the Desert Storm was the employment of air power was the only apple worth plucking from the lessons of Desert Storm. And they have systematically enhanced and improved the capability, the capacity, and the qualitatively, the Chinese Air Force. The PAF was smart. It joined the Chinese bandwagon, and like you mentioned very rightly, in that Kamra aircraft factory, they started joint producing Chinese platforms, and the JF-17 is a product of that. And very interestingly, the PAF started exercising with the PLAF way back in 2011. They called it Exercise Shaheen. And this Exercise Shaheen it has gone through 10 iterations. That means the last exercise was 2023, Exercise Shaheen. And this has been a very sort of a symbiotic exercise and relationship, which signifies underscores the relationship between the PLAF and the PAF, is that PAF gains from the Chinese in terms of aviation industry assistance, high-end aviation industry technology, platforms, weapons, a variety of all aviation-related assets, infrastructure, assistance, and to a great extent has now got a handle to the way it seems to advance their aviation industry further. On the other hand, the Chinese gain from the PAF, from the vast operational experience that the PAF has. Do remember here, the last war with the Chinese fought was in Korea, whereas Pakistan has continued to stay. I mean, apart from its conflicts and wars with India, it had continued to stay in operational sort of touch with the war against the U.S. war against the Russians in Afghanistan. The PF took active part in it. It flew enormous amount of sorties. It has shot down Russian aircraft platforms as well. But it has also taken part in the global war of terror and used. The PF has been employed extensively in the FATA area. So the point I'm trying to make that the PLAF gains from operational experience of PAF. PAF has enormous amount of exposure to Western exercises and tactics and training. Do remember that they have been trained by the US for the longest period of time. So the PLF gains from the PAF from the experience and the exposure flying with them regularly. And most importantly, for the PLAF, they also get a heads up and an insight into IAF's tactics and concepts of operation, which the PAF is reasonably familiar with. So it's a very symbiotic kind of relationship. And for the longest time, I've been when I've been talking about it, I also mentioned this fact that Zhu Qilang, who was the vice chairman of the Chinese Military Commission, an erstwhile vice chairman, he's retired recently about a year back. He was an ex-PLF chief, and he furthered the cause of the PLF, A, with the CMC, and B, also visited Pakistan, met its military leadership. This is in 2019, and has apparently convinced the PAF leadership or Pakistani military leadership that the PAF should be the lead service in any future contingency. Now, there's a background to this. This is because both in Doklam and Galwan, the way the Indian Air Force spun up and activated and started operations in the high altitude during this Galwan and Doklam crisis was noticed very carefully by the PLAF, because the PLAF capability in Tibet is still not robust and it is not permanent. It's a temporary capability. They're building up infrastructure ever since Galwan and Doklam rapidly. But the point here I'm trying to make here is that PAF has seen this asymmetric advantage which India enjoys in Tibet, and it is perfectly suited for its needs and necessities to get the PAF on board, which it is willing to do. So the PAF and PLAF have been collusive partners, and it's so much so that the last 2023 exercise involved areas of future operations, which included large formation, offensive packaging, offensive strikes, air defense operations, offensive maritime operations. First, this is in 2023. Apart from a huge amount of cross-training of aircrew on common platforms. Both sides had Chinese AVACs, both sides had JF-10s. So they reached a level of collusion and training where tomorrow, if I'm just say that if the Pakistani Air Force or the Chinese Air Force were to use each other's pilots, we wouldn't know the difference. And they could happily do that because they fly the same platforms and they are trained together. So the collusion is a long way, and this was, to my mind, I think we must stop using this term collusion, because collusion gives an aura of that it is a secret affair. It's out in the open.
Yes.
So now
Absolutely.
the collusion could be called active collaboration, if I may say so. So this collaboration which we have seen is a given. It will continue in all future conflicts with India, and it will it will impact all our surface operations, whether in the continental domain or even in the maritime domain.
So absolutely, I think we should be mentally prepared that it is the two adversaries which we are fighting against. So I would like to ask you one last question. What should be India's strategic approach in terms of leveraging air power?
My favorite question. Simply put, history wise, till now, possibly just till now, India, I will put it, has a, I will say, has a inadequate appreciation of air power and hence has not been able to leverage it adequately. Simply put, background, it was a tactical air force, a hand me down from the RAF. We built our air forces with great difficulty, but over a period of time. But it was a struggle always in terms of resources availability. But what is very interesting to note is that our air power employment has been constrained and restrained in its employment in the larger national interest in wars and conflicts right through. 47, 48, air power was restricted. That means we had only 6 squadrons, only 3 were allowed to, 3 were allowed to operate in JNK. Air power, offensive air power at that time itself played an enormous role in the army, supporting the army's operations. And in fact, there was a proposal by the defense minister, that Indian defense minister, to create a cordon sanitaire where the Indian Air Force could operate along the those days the border, designated border, and target the insurgents there. But this was not agreed to by the British leadership. And we must remember at that point in time, the British leadership, that means the Army, Air Force, Navy chiefs were still Britishers. So they didn't want this escalation of the Kashmiri conflict to a larger scale between two nations which were a part of the Commonwealth. It would have looked very bad for UK. So they held back air power. 62, we know what happened. We didn't employ offensive air power, which is, I think, a strategic mistake which we will regret forever. 65, again, we were constrained. That means we couldn't hit Pakistan air bases offensively and preemptively. We were restricted to respond and attack only if attacked. Pakistan saw no such distinction, and to our disadvantage. And 40% of our air force was actually kept aside, deployed in the east against the Chinese possibility of entering the war. So effectively in 65, we fought with only 60% of our air power capability. 1971 was the only war in which air power was not restrained. Again in 99, Kargil, we were again restrained. We couldn't cross the border. We couldn't cross the LOC. We couldn't target anything across the LOC. So the point I'm trying to make is that we have a history of restricting air power, and air power strategic capability. Air power is not just about air defense. That is one of the roles. Equally important role is strategic air targeting capability, which in 1971 we targeted Pakistan's energy system, its oil tanks in Karachi, Kiamari, in Sui gas plant. We targeted them to a extent where it is recorded in the history of the war, 1965 war, written by the MOD, published by the MOD, which says and admits that the strategic effects of India's air power had an enormous effect on Pakistan, wherein if we had continued the war for another week or so, Pakistan they were running out of fuel. They were importing it from Iran. So the larger point is that these strategic effects were missed out in our exaltation and the excitement of the victory on the east over Bangladesh. So this strategic lesson has been lost out. 71, 50 years ago. Kargil 25 years ago. So effectively, what has it done? It has gone out of the strategic memory of our military leadership. And if you notice in the last 5-7 years, there was hardly any talk about air power and the aerial domain. It was all about continental power, all about the maritime domain, little realizing, and this was going on in the world. We saw it in the world over Russia, Ukraine, Kargil. Air power has been extensively leveraged by every other nation. And we were, I will say, and I make no bones about it, we have been air power blind. I think now, having seen Sindoor, it has suddenly come back into people's focus, offensive air power and what it can do. In our outlook, strategic outlook, if you notice, Dr. Roshan, if I may say so, that when it's as far as the northern threat is concerned, it's a defensive. Hold your position. Hold, not given a cede an inch of territory. But can we do that without air power? No way. Pakistan, can we do that without air power? No way. Our military, the strategic think tanks seem to have forgotten in the past that both Pakistan is a near pure air force and China is a larger air force. And both these air forces are well integrated and enmeshed in their military strategy. In our military strategy, air power was always looked at as a support element. I think that has been a change which I'm seeing in the recent years,
Yes.
but not enough.
Yes.
It is changing. It has not changed. It has not changed.
Yeah.
Those mindsets
I think
are still there.
No, I think it's a good change we are seeing. So I'm sure, hopefully, in future also, a lot of changes will take place. And if you permit, I would like to take one or two questions.
Most certainly. One point I'll just make here,
Yes.
that while we look at air power in a larger perspective, from a strategic perspective for the future, do remember one thing: Air Force and Indian Air Force has never claimed that it is we are the ones who are going to win wars and things like that. Yes, there have been a lot of loose statements in the past, but the fact is that you cannot do without this today. And future military strategies must look at all elements of the military: land, air, sea, cyber, and space,
Yes.
mostly in an equal manner to decide what are the best combinations specific to the context of the conflict we are going to face in the future.
Absolutely, you
yours.
rightly pointed. Absolutely, you really rightly pointed out, because the future warfare is all multi-domain warfare, and we have seen that it is not only the traditional air force, navy, and the army, but it also cyber and space plays a very important place, especially cyber and space, because
Absolutely.
asymmetric warfare is all done through these platforms. So we would just take few questions. Okay. When it comes to Paki BVR capability, how does IF reassess them and our decreasing squadron strength?
Okay.
Mr. Srivastav, he's asking this. Tushar.
Okay. Tushar Srivastav. Okay.
Yes.
The larger point is that BVRs are critical for air power. And if you see down history, and I mentioned this, that the reason in 1999, the Pakistani Air Force, they were carrying out combat air patrols over Skardu, but they did not come anywhere near, simply because of our air defense fighters were carrying BVRs, which outsticked or had a larger range compared to the Russian, compared to the what the Pakistanis had, and they learned this lesson. Turn it around. If you look at and they the Pakistani Air Force very smartly leveraged the United States to get the AMRAAMs. Outcome was that when we went into Balakot, actually it was an asymmetry in favor of Pakistan with the AMRAAMs. because at that point in time, we didn't have an equivalent, which we have now, which we have acquired. So the point I'm trying to make is it is critical that you must maintain your weapon advantages over the adversary, and should you lose them, then you're in trouble. Now the challenge here is these missiles, the ranges keep expanding, so you cannot stay with one set of missiles and be happy that this will see me through. You have to keep
Yes.
upgrading it. And given India's acquisition you know, methods and methodology and procedures, it's a very difficult call. Whereas for our adversaries, it's much faster in acquiring and upgrading the weapon system. So this is a big lesson which we knew all along, and it has been underscored at this point in time. That the same thing happened with the PL-15, overstated, huge range, but at the end of the day, the fact remains that this range aspect is what will define the effectiveness of beyond visual range missiles, and it's an ongoing race. So this is something we have to be cognizant of and try and stay ahead of the fight. And platforms, yes, there is no denying it that we are down absolutely at the lowest level. Because do remember, people, there's a lot of argument going on that we should not look at manned fighters anymore, no squadrons, and invest only in drone technology for the future. I think these are little immature, underthought ideas. You will need most certainly robust manned platforms for a fair amount of time to come. Because do remember, the world over, in fact, all the modern air forces are investing in fifth and sixth generation platforms. Why are they doing that? Because the manned platform is not going anywhere. Yes, the quantum of drones and unmanned systems will increase. So we cannot do away with the shortcoming of this manned platforms that we need. Maybe, I don't know, I don't think we'll ever be able to hit the 42 squadron requirements, but that notwithstanding, we have to certainly strive to go and expand it. And maybe the problem is in our production scale, indigenous production scale. It has to match up. China produces 100 platforms a year, and we barely.
That is the next question.
Yeah,
that's the next question.
Okay. So, okay.
The next question.
Carry it forward to the next question as well.
Yeah, the next question is concerning the same thing what you have been talking about. It's Mr. Kailash Joshi. He's asking about the stealth bombers and how it needs to work on. I mean, we need to have self-made bombers. So you were talking about it, so you can elaborate on that further.
Okay. So one is, I'll just finish the last point which I was making. A production scale of fighters or whatever platforms we do has to go up drastically, and we should be able to look at producing at least at the least at least one squadron strength for starters, if not more, in the immediate future as soon as possible. Okay, now coming to the fact is that the issue of stealth bombers, bombers itself is a challenge. Do understand that bombers, Indian Air Force had bombers when it was with the RAF, but do remember the long range bombers remained with the RAF. And when the partition took place, there was someone called the Blackett Committee commented and said that India did not need long range bombers for its future security. They had no idea it was just after independence. They had no idea what India was to grow into. So this was a challenge. And the Indian Air Force knew that it needed bombers, so it tried to resurrect old Liberator bombers, but that obviously didn't last long enough. Then we managed to get the Canberra, which was a medium bomber or a light bomber in its classical parlance, and we managed to stay with that. By the time the Canberras were going out, at that point in time, the modern multi-role combat aircraft had enormous strike capabilities. So they could carry the same weapon payloads as the Canberras. So at some point we said, okay, we don't need to look at bombers at this point in time. And plus we were struggling as an Air Force itself. But bombers do bring a lot to the table from a strategic perspective, that internationally any Air Force which has bombers is looked as a strategic Air Force. And not having it puts a question mark, hey, look, you don't have bombers. But our requirement of bombers has been visited for the longest time. Air Commodore Jasjit Singh, our I think a deep thinker on APA, believed in it. There is a lot of thought in Indian Air Force today for the need for bombers, but they are enormously expensive. A, B, the choices are very limited. The question is who's going to give it to us? We can only get it on lease, or unless we look at manufacturing a bomber ourselves, which, given the struggles which we have with the fighters, I think is a dream long way off. But even the future, if there's an opportunity to lease probably a squadron worth of bombers, it will enormously expand our strategic capability, especially in the maritime domain, not so much over the continental domain, especially especially against China.
Uh, Dhruvi Mate was just commenting that with the swarm of drones coming up, the effectiveness of the aircrafts, but which you have already spoken about it, that you need both manned and unmanned, both platforms you have. And there's another question from Akashika, and she's our RA at Clause, and she's asking, how do you see the PAF evolving over the next decade? Do we expect it to be a more modern, more dependent, or stuck in the middle tier capability? What are your views about it?
Most certainly. Pakistan is very clear that what air power brings to the table for their military strategy. And I think even the Pakistani army realizes this. Otherwise, in a, what should I say, in a army dominant nation, there is no way Pakistan would have grown to the level it has. And this is especially if you look at the dynamics between the Pakistani Air Force and the Pakistani Army, which I'm afraid has never been good historically. But if the PAF has been able to reach the level of modernization it has obviously been with the blessings of its military leadership. So that means military leadership places great value on its air power. So Pakistani Air Force is most certainly going to modernize as quickly and as rapidly it can to try and narrow the gap it faces against the Indian Air Force. Do understand that the gap has narrowed automatically, more so because our numbers have reduced and we have not been able to replenish it. But Pakistan has been able to upgrade its Air Force all through, and it will continue to do so in the years to come, because both China, and I mentioned this in the PLAF collusion come cooperation and coordination, that this is a given, that in the future the PF and the PLAF will continue to collaborate very closely because it suits both nations. So India's will have a struggle unless it really makes its aviation industry more robust and more responsive.
Thank you so much, Air Marshal Choudhury. We really discussed very extensively the air power capabilities of Pakistan, China, India. So I'm really thankful to you for joining this podcast. Thank you so much. And also
Thank you.
our viewers, thank you so much for joining today this podcast. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Goodbye.
Dr. Roshan. Thank you. Thanks. I'm grateful to Claus to give me that opportunity, and hopefully we shall revisit this some other time in the future.
Definitely, definitely.
Thank you very much.